Thank you, Karen. Michelle Huneven is an award-winning author and a Unitarian Universalist. Today I'll be talking about her book, Search a Novel, and some of the ideas that are in the book. I am committed to not spoiling the ending for anyone. I know some of us have already read it. Huneven's protagonist is Dana Potowski, and the flyleaf says, Dana Potowski is a restaurant critic, a food writer, and a longtime member of a progressive Unitarian and Universalist congregation in Southern California. Just as Dana is finishing a book tour, she is asked to join the church search committee for a new minister. Dana has doubts, but she's under pressure to find the topic for her next book, so she decides to secretly pen a memoir with recipes about the experience. End quote. Dana joins a committee with too many members, chosen through a process which is not wholly ethical, and encounters a rich variety of stereotypical UU members and friends. I won't say a lot more about the plot. I really do want to remain spoiler-free. The committee does chat with quite a few UU ministers, themselves a variety of stereotypical UU ministers, listens to several of them preach, and does choose a candidate to recommend to their congregation. It has taken me quite a while to read this book because most of the time when I'm reading it, I was angry. I was angry at the characters in the book and at the UU clergy who said or did things similar to those in the book. I was mostly mad at Michelle Huneven for writing the tale this way. I don't know which is worse, if all these people were so unethical and so unself-aware, or that they were not, but Michelle Huneven wrote a book making it seem like UUs are all flawed. And I'm trying not to pigeonhole her as a UU author. I often say we should not judge an entire race by one member of that race, or judge all people with non-standard gender identities based on that one person from work. I'm trying not to pigeonhole her as exemplifying all UUs just because she's telling her story here. So I'm trying to let her be authentic as possible and tell her story and not require that she represent all UUs. So, even when I'm being polite and as ethical as possible in that way, there are some ideas which are genuinely harmful, which I want to speak against at least a little bit. The first one is interim ministry. Interim ministry is a good and important thing. Virtually every congregation should engage an interim minister after their previous minister leaves. This congregation has done that traditionally quite well. I totally expect that whenever I leave, hopefully a good decade or more from now, all of you will seek an interim minister while you do the work of searching for a new long-term settled minister. Why do I think that interim ministry is good? Recall the story of Stella the rebound dog, if you will. From our story for all ages, Becky and I had a nice, easy life together with our previous geriatric Labrador retriever, Lily. We thought we understood what it was like to cohabitate with a dog. We were good at this. And then Lily died, and we brought Stella home, and within a few months of hyperactivity, too smart for her own good behaviors, and frankly, being a chaos agent, we would not have been ready for a mellow but young and regularly active standard poodle like Phoebe. If we had not spent time with Stella, we would have been shocked and appalled by poor Phoebe and not invited her into our life. Now, the analogy is not perfect. It's not the job of most interim ministers to shock the congregation. It is the job of an interim to demonstrate that there are many ways of doing ministry. Just because a congregation loved or hated or just got accustomed to the approach the former minister had, there are many other ways of sharing ministry. Although at least 2 ministers in Huneven's book say that the congregation does not need an interim, those characters are wrong. Secondly, and similarly, if I heard a search committee say to me, "We are so healthy we don't need an interim minister," I would consider that a red flag and probably cross them off my list entirely. I don't know anyone, human or congregation, that is totally healthy. Healthy is not an absence of issues. Health is awareness of and active work on our issues. Calling ourselves and our congregation perfect or perfectly healthy is some combination of Protestant work ethic, white supremacy culture, perfectionism, and this sort of Midwest nice, passive-aggressive instead of respectful conflict. As far as I know, we're all got issues. We're all working on our issues. And if you don't admit to that, that, I think, is a problem. So the characters in the book that keep saying, "Oh, that church doesn't need any interim minister. They're already healthy." Oy. And that goes beyond emotional systems. There are other systems to be concerned about: the building, the grounds, the finances. In the book, a woman named Faith Alma is 95 years old, and her pledge is by far the largest in the congregation. In fact, her pledge basically pays the salary of the senior minister. That is a skewed giving profile. In a congregation I once served, the top quartile of donors was 2 people, both of them in their 80s. And when we asked a financial consultant about this situation, who was provided by our UUA, the consultant was deeply concerned. That's not a healthy situation to have all of your donors in 1/4 of the, or 1/4 of all of your donations coming from 1 or 2 people. That's alarming and needs to be addressed soon. So the people in the book saying that their situation is healthy when they get a ton of money from one single, very old person, no, that's a misunderstanding. And finally, the book suggests that the right minister will attract many new members, all of whom will open their wallets and bring an influx of cash, thereby solving almost all of the congregation's issues at once. Please do not expect ministers to bring in dozens of new ministers. This simply doesn't work. In the book, there is one person who has done it at her congregation twice, and if you look at it a little more closely, it's because that minister worked with all of the lay leaders and spent a couple years training the members to do the work. I have seen or heard or been part of at least 4 congregations where they had pre-pledges or an angel donor or a board discretionary fund or the endowment used to pay for a new minister, which is going to bring in lots of people and save the congregation. And it has not ever worked. And in fact, one of those congregations now has no endowment and no minister and is dwindling even more rapidly than they were before. Members, the research that I've seen indicate that people come back, people join congregations, people stay in congregations because of the members. They might come on a Sunday sometime because of the minister, but they stay because of the human beings in the pulpit. And doesn't that make sense to y'all? The people in this little area here come and go. It's the people in the congregation that stay. So, you'll want to look for the perfect minister to come and serve the congregation, certainly, but don't expect them to truly be perfect, or you'll get the ones that Karen just talked about. Now, our second reading is by the Reverend Dr. Natalie Fenimore, who was born in 1958. Fenimore serves the UU congregation at Shelter Rock as its lead minister. Natalie Fenimore is a past president of the Liberal Religious Educators Association, LRETA, and she was a member of the UUA's Commission on Institutional Change. In the 2017 book, Centering, Navigating Race, Authenticity, and Power in Ministry, Fenimore wrote, "When Shirley Chisholm was asked why she, a black woman, was running for president, 'You don't have a chance. Why are you doing that?' She said, 'Because I am in love with the America that does not yet exist.'" And that's how Unitarian Universalism is also. I'm in love with the Unitarian Universalism that does not yet exist. But I have to hold up both the love for that thing and the love for the reality. It does not yet exist. It probably will not exist in my lifetime. I don't think it will in that of my children, but I cannot deny my love for it. End quote. I appreciate Dr. Fenimore's expression that she loves the Unitarian Universalism that does not yet exist. She's talking about race and class and all the other oppressions and identities that we humans use to draw distinctions between us. I am glad to be reminded that I too can love the Unitarian Universalism and the UU congregation and the UU author, which does not yet exist. In the Washington Post, Ron Charles reviewed Search and wrote, "Like her protagonist, Huneven spent time in seminary and then became a restaurant reviewer and award-winning food writer. She attends a Unitarian Universalist church herself and once served on a search committee to find an assistant minister. Huneven's fellow congregants must be poring over these pages, searching for signs of their faces and foibles. But I suspect the author is far too experienced to lift her own acquaintances into this story untransformed." But she didn't. And that's what I'm most unhappy with. The harm she's done to colleagues and to members who were unkindly depicted in her novel. That's why I put a picture of the neighborhood UU church in Pasadena, California on the order of service. That's the real church where Michelle Huneven belongs. That's where the 2015 search for a new minister got turned into her novel. In her fictional preface to the fictional second edition, Huneven has her protagonist Dana Petowski write the following. "To answer a few of the many questions readers have asked, yes, this is a memoir of a real experience. It is not fiction. I was on a search committee for a senior minister, and this is my story of that search. Others might tell it differently. That said, names and certain details have been altered to protect identities. Several of the living have recognized themselves, although sometimes in the wrong character. Libel law offers clear guidelines for making a person unidentifiable in print. Change 3 characteristics, for example, and I followed them. The talk of lawsuits has subsided." I think that's the mark of a guilty conscience. As I understand it, Ms. Huneven was part of a search committee for an assistant minister. Several years later, there was another search committee for a senior minister, and she interviewed at least some of the members from that search committee and based her book on that search. Huneven implies that she's changed enough characteristics to satisfy libel laws, but she didn't change enough that some people, ministers and regular members, cannot recognize themselves. One of my friends and colleagues wrote, "I think what Huneven said is that it's not a direct retelling of one situation, presumably the 2015 search her church in Pasadena did, but it definitely uses real details and real events thinly veiled from that search and other searches. A lot of the ministers in it are composites of several UU ministers, but some of them are still quite identifiable, and not just by me. I've talked to other colleagues who made the same identifications I did. 3 different colleagues have asked me how I felt about being fictionalized." Another colleague wrote about, quote, "the hurtful impact of the real-life, now former, search committee members," unquote. I just think this is unethical and it's unkind. I'm angry that Huneven convinced search committee members to ignore their covenant of confidentiality, which she herself had taken once and so knew existed. And I'm angry she did not change enough details to spare the feelings of the other members of her congregation, the people that sit with her on Sunday mornings. And anger is a good thing. Being angry and engaging respectfully to learn and grow is part of why we have congregations. Anger calls our attention to our sense of injustice. Covenanting together that we will remain in relationship even if we disagree, especially when we disagree, that's a powerful laboratory for transformation. One of the reasons we come together, I think. Now, the New York Times review, Mary Beth Keene writes, "It's probably the old working-class Catholic foundation in me that asks what a church actually is if anything goes, including believing of God in the first place. The whole organization feels not unlike a highbrow book club or group exercise class, where the participants are hugely devoted to the instructor and how much he inspires and motivates them. I love book clubs. I'm all for exercise. But if the book club disbands and the cycle studio closes, there is no great absence in anyone's life. You can still go on being a decent, morally upright person." Clearly, the reviewer is wrong about the whole belief thing, obvi. She also misses the fact that UU congregations do create deep connections and meaningful friendships and do good work in the world. And there would be an absence noted if they left that congregation or if the congregation left the community. Now I'm going to stop talking about the book and just talk about my life. I have been part of many committees in my life, in churches, in Boy Scouts, in festival planning, in employee outreach and celebration. In the UU world in particular, I have been on committees in congregations, districts, regions, clusters, chapters, and national groups. How many of you have heard the phrase forming, storming, norming, and performing? At least a few of us. It's a group dynamics idea that first a group forms and then it storms. They argue among themselves a bit and they finally reach a norm. And that's when after they have argued and reached a consensus, then they can perform. I think that happens in many of the groups that I've been part of. And you know, the groups that didn't storm, I don't miss them. I don't think about them at all. Most of the groups that did have at least a storm process, I'm still in relationship with those people today, or if not, I definitely feel that absence. Engaging in conflict is not necessarily a sign of unhealth. It can be part of becoming more healthy. When engaged within a covenant of care and mutual growth and concern, conflict can deepen connections and transform individuals and entire organizations. Unlike the opinion of the New York Times reviewer, if our congregation disbanded, I would feel an immense absence in my life. And conversely, I am grateful for the richness I experience here and the presence of all y'all in my life. May that continue, so may we be.